Hello! Most important about the history of American education is how it started and gradually changed and improved with the help of a lot of honorable and dedicated people to our education system that we have now. From 1770 to about 1890, we had the Common School era. We are going to visit a school built around the end of this era. Please follow me. Follow me. This is an old school. It was built around 1872. As you can see, it has one door for a one-room building, and now it is a museum. You can come and visit. In Ridgewood, New Jersey. Let's go knock on the door. Well, hello, thank you for visiting me. The first schools were only one-room buildings and only built in larger towns of the 13 colonies. Most of my students only learn to recite the alphabet, and we also spend a lot of time reading the Bible and prayers. The ages of my students range almost up to my own age, so it makes it really difficult to teach everyone. We only have 82 days of school during the whole year. Also, only privileged children are allowed to receive higher education. I also have to collect firewood to keep us all warm on those frosty winter days. Now, Thomas Jefferson had the idea that every child should receive an education. To a lot of people, right now, this seems really radical. But he said that our democracy depends on our children's education. Now this fine gentleman, Horace Mann, he went horseback to visit the facilities all over the country that they use for schools, and he wrote observations about them. But let me tell you, he found horrible conditions. He found rodents, the textbooks were awful, and of course all the kids' ages were mixed together. His reform ideas were to create common textbooks, which would be so helpful to us, to get more teacher education and to get free tax-supported education for the students as well. Catherine Beecher, she was a fine lady. She created a school for women so they can get educated and become teachers. This was a wonderful idea because it gave women like me a different opportunity than just to get married. This attracted a lot of women and they went to the school. Some women were also recruited to head out west because they needed more help out there with teachers. But the conditions were not very good, so I heard. Thanks for joining me today. Well, thank you to this dedicated teacher. And to continue, shortly after Horace Mann's death, Massachusetts passed a law to require public tax-supported education. This was a major step towards advancement. Still, teachers received very low wages. They were working in extremely bad conditions, and especially women faced a lot of bias and discrimination. Margaret Haley helped improve the salary and suggested adding tenure to lessen the insecurity for teachers at the end of their career. She was also the leader of the first union for teachers only, the Chicago Teachers Federation. And some years later, in 1916, this federation helped establish the American Federation of Teachers to support teachers' rights and their benefits. Later, also standardized tests were created to see the improvement of students and as a part of the teacher's evaluation for a while. We also covered the Jim Crow era, during which they tried to show that separate is still segregation, and a lot of trouble continued in the especially South until the mid 1950s. Minorities like Du Bois and Booker Washington helped establish better schools for the enslaved or former enslaved. So they did make it possible for everyone to gain education. And in 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education helped end segregation in public schools. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, that compliance to integration was necessary, and if not followed, it would result in loss of federal funds. A year later, in 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed to grant funding for professional development, materials for instructions, etc. In regards to special education, a lot of advancements were made. In 1973, the Rehabilitation Act, also called Section 504, was passed. This requires that if a child has a medical diagnosis needing modifications in the school setting, they need to be accommodated. In 1975, they passed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act to ensure every child can participate in the least restrictive environment and is integrated. All of them took part in making schools responsible for creating IEPs, which is an individual education plan, to make appropriate modifications. Later on in 1990, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, ADA, which requires access to all public buildings for everyone, was passed. The No Child Left Behind Act was initiated by Bush in 2001. It means that all students should have the equal opportunity for higher education. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the brief summary of important facts in our history of American education. We can really be thankful to have what we have. But of course, with things changing in our world, there is always room for adjustment and continued improvements.